I think exosomes could really be potentially even more popular than stem cells when it comes to research on longevity in mammalian models. I mean, if you look at the most recent study, it was a couple weeks ago in rodent models, about a 16% increase in lifespan with exosome infusions compared to, studies that you see out there on NAD, on resveratrol, even stem cells. I've seen nothing come close to that for increased lifespan in a mammalian model, and that was via exosome infusion. With super slow training, it's really safe and you can get really strong really fast and maintain muscle really effectively. And it doesn't take a lot. So 2 to 3 times a week, if you're doing one single set to failure on your major movements, like chest press, shoulder press, pull down, row, squat, and deadlift, that would be an example of like 6 exercises you could do. You're in and out within 25 to 30 minutes for your actual strength training.
Hey everybody, Reagan Archibald here with Unreasonable Health, and today I've got a person who I'm sure many of you have followed, you've listened to, you've got great advice from, but it's Ben Greenfield, and he's been at the clinic a few times, and I'm so glad to finally get him on the show. He's a busy man traveling the world and saving lives and biohacking his way through any opposition that may come his way. But Ben, good to have you on the show.
Yo, I don't know about saving lives, but definitely traveling the world and battling opposition for sure. As a matter of fact, dude, I just got back from London. I've been traveling like a madman, just speaking at all these conferences. I just got back from London. This rarely happens to me, but my body totally crashed yesterday. I mean, like crashed big time. Like couldn't get out of bed till like noon. Flu-like symptoms, full body aches. So I did 50,000 IU of vitamin D. I did a rectal ozone. I climbed into the infrared sauna and literally just almost like self-induced a fever for like an hour in there. Got out, went to bed, slept 10 hours last night, and got into my Soviet kettlebell training this morning, and I feel pretty good. But I was a little nervous yesterday. I'm like, gosh, I hope I can be lucid for Reagan's podcast. But so yeah, I even biohacked my way out of death's door yesterday.
Man, congrats. And Ben and I had a chance to spend some time at Sundance last month for Da Vinci 50, and you returned from India when you and I were.
Yeah, I was still healing up the lungs. I told you I figured out probably the most powerful thing I've ever done for healing up the lungs quickly, because there's all these things, hydration and glutathione, high dose vitamin C is good. A lot of people use a nebulizer. I talked with some doctors in India, and their protocol, as far as like a relatively scalable, inexpensive protocol for managing all the air pollution over there, which is through the roof. I mean, going for a walk for 2 hours in Delhi right now is the equivalent of smoking about 20 cigarettes. That's how high the air hazard index is. And they do nebulizing, because you can get a nebulizer for like 40 to 50 bucks on Amazon, and they nebulize hydrogen peroxide saline solution, right? 3% food grade hydrogen peroxide. I think they're mixing it in like a 10-to-1 with saline water. And you just put this nebulizer over your face for like 20 minutes and do that as a daily practice for, whatever, air pollution, wildfire smoke, COPD, asthma, etc. So I was using this nebulizing protocol, and then another doctor in the functional medicine space told me about how powerful exosomes could be for specifically pulmonary issues and even like healing damaged lungs. So I nebulized 2 vials of exosomes and literally felt like a 3-lunged mutant after I did that. And so that was top of the totem pole. Obviously not the cheapest way to heal up the lungs after air pollution, but that's what got me over the hump from India.
Oh man! So how do you know how the billions of exosomes you nebulized?
I don't know how many were in the vial, but I just did a saline solution with exosomes and nebulized every last drop. I went through 2 vials over a couple of days.
That's a great idea. We've done, I've done nebulized stem cells, but never the exosomes. Great idea.
Yeah, the other thing you can do, and I've also done this since, and it's up there with like one of the most powerful nootropics you could use, like a modafinil or something, is you can take one of your nasal spray bottles and put your exosomes into that and just go through a whole vial, spraying it up into the nose and huffing it throughout the day. And I mean, my head went clear as a bell for like 2 weeks doing that.
Man, yeah, we've been doing that with cord plasma. Injections and then nasal, and it's a great way to clear out the blood. But I love that idea of getting the exosomes, just kind of hit it throughout the course of the day. It's smart.
Yeah. I think exosomes could really be potentially even more popular than stem cells when it comes to research on longevity in mammalian models. I mean, if you look at the most recent study, it was a couple of weeks ago in rodent models, about a 16% increase in lifespan with exosome infusions, or like an exosome IV. And this was all via the PPAR pathway, actually it was the PGC1 alpha pathway, which is the one responsible for mitochondrial proliferation. The same thing you'd get if you were doing like, high intensity interval training. That kind of triggers the same pathway. But I mean, compared to, studies that you see out there on NAD, on resveratrol, even stem cells, I've seen nothing come close to that for increased lifespan in a mammalian model. And that was via exosome infusion.
Man, and I've seen there's a recent study where they took rats and they induced a stroke in the rats, and then they did intranasal exosomes, and then they could see where the exosomes were actually able to turn on stem cell signaling right there in the area of the brain that was damaged. So,
right, yeah, that's why I like them too. I mean, they're really a paracrine signaling factor, meaning even if you don't combine them with stem cells, which I think is a wonderful treatment, but even if you don't combine them with stem cells, you're still seeing mobilization of your own endogenous stem cell pool.
Yeah. We do part of our longevity protocols is 17 billion exosomes subcutaneously injected once a month. Just following the lead of Sandra Kaufman. Did you meet her at Da Vinci 50?
Yeah, I actually got an exosome infusion at Da Vinci from Sandra. Oh yeah. And actually, it was very interesting. And by the way, I didn't know that about sub-Q exosomes, but I had a fascinating conversation with Sandra, and I'm going to interview her on my podcast because she's like, I travel so much. Everything that everybody's spending all this time doing, like sauna for heat shock proteins, cryotherapy for cold shock proteins, fasting for cellular autophagy. She said, and she's an anesthesiologist and MD. And she says, I've got a pharmaceutical protocol that can target every single one of those pathways. And it's kind of like this, almost like get dropped off by a helicopter on the top of Mount Everest rather than climbing Mount Everest type of approach. But I thought it was such a fascinating idea of like, how much could you technically simulate, and also kind of a controversial idea with a pill, a pharmaceutical, versus doing all of these things. I'm going to actually interview her about that because her first book on aging was fantastic, and I interviewed her about that. But yeah, she's a very interesting lady.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, because if you look at the pathways, like cellular signaling is something we've gotten. I've done a ton of research on, obviously with the peptides, and seeing how we can work on improving cell signaling. What have you come across as far as like if you had to, kind of rate your top 3 cell signaling factors?
Oh gosh, I don't really know. As far as cell signaling direct, obviously, exosomes would be at the top. But, I suppose if we're talking about cell signaling specifically with regard to things like stem cell mobilization, if you look at, I don't know if you know Christian Drapeau, who he runs that company STEM Regen, and kind of talks about some different molecules that can assist with that. Talks quite a bit about blue-green algae like phyosinanin or it's not phyosinanin, anyways, blue-green algae, spirulina, chlorella, etc., as being one way that you can do that. Another one is aloe vera, and then another one was black cumin, like a black seed oil. So those are obviously all just kind of herbal pathways. But, back to Sandra, it is kind of interesting because I still think that very similar to high intensity interval training, being able to trigger these same pathways as exosomes, maybe not quite as powerfully, there still is a great amount of, character building, self-control, grittiness, perseverance, etc., built through actually doing certain activities that might be considered stoic or difficult versus just, popping a pill. So I think you do need to find a balance.
Yeah. I think even with the GLP-1s, people's behaviors, it's much easier to make changes around food and lifestyle on a GLP-1 agonist. But now the next wave of therapies are going to be for exercise mimetics. Like what's the closest thing we can do to mimic what you get out of a good workout? But you and I are people who actually really enjoy working out, and we get it's like no matter how much MOTS-C I do or 5-amino-1-MQ, it doesn't give me the same thrill as finishing a mountain bike ride or
it doesn't give you the same dopaminergic mental feel good effect either. I mean, it's an interesting field. I think there's a great deal of overlap between what is probably more popular right now, calorie restriction mimetics, and exercise mimetics. So, I mean, if you look at spermidine, NAD, or resveratrol, for example, right? Those are all calorie restriction mimetics. Those are different than a GLP-1 agonist, which would be more like a hunger control mechanism, and that would be, of course, like, Ozempic or Wegovy or what's the Teresa, the newer one, tirzepatide?
Tirzepatide is
tirzepatide, which is probably the most powerful and efficacious. And I mean, if you have really impaired ghrelin pathways, or you're, even just genetically predisposed to obesity or diabetes, or you struggle with that, those big guns might be appropriate in those cases. But I think there are other ways that you can stimulate that GLP-1 pathway, and also other appetite satiating signaling pathways like CCK and PYY through alternative means, like very bitter substances, right? There's one that's been studied of late called amarasate, and it's actually an extremely bitter compound wrapped in a lipid layer. It's in a capsule. You swallow it, it passes through the stomach and triggers the bitter receptors in the small intestine, hits 3 different hunger signaling pathways, but doesn't have kind of like the nausea-inducing effect of a GLP-1, and also doesn't seem to be associated with a lot of the other side effects. Another one would be triggering those hunger pathways through the microbiome, and that's what companies like, like Pendulum Probiotics are doing with Akkermansia and Butyricum and Bifidobacterium to adjust the microbiome in such a way that you feel fuller sooner from a meal. And there's no reason you can't combine both those strategies, right? Like trigger the microbiome and then prior to a meal, have something that's got a high bitter element to it. And then the third is probably a little bit more popular or well-known, but also triggers a lot of these same pathways via ghrelin, and that would be ketones, just like drinking exogenous ketones. So that, that's for the hunger control. Then you have the calorie restriction mimetics, which I was talking about, that mimic the state that you'd be in if you were fasted. So you're triggering some of those same cellular longevity and autophagy pathways as you would get if you were fasted. And that'd be like your spermidine, your NAD, your resveratrol, et cetera. And then these newer exercise mimetics, they're really interesting. I forget the name of the newest one that was recently studied. It's got a big, long, Star Wars robot-like name.
Is it the SLU, the SLUP 332?
How is it? How is it again?
It's SLU PP332.
Yeah, that one. And
that doesn't sound at all like Star Wars, Ben. I don't know what.
I guess it depends which one you watch, but yeah, the R2D2 one, that I mean, it's very impressive. The data I've seen on it and the safety on it as an exercise mimetic, probably the most powerful that I've seen. Some of those peptides you mentioned, like MOTS-c, Epitalon, they could act similarly. But yeah, I agree, and I think in an ideal state, you're again back to combining lifestyle and supplementation, kind of coming at this from two different pathways, right? Like use some kind of a GLP-1 agonist strategy if you deal with excess hunger, but also consider modalities like exercise, weight training, or sauna, all of which could have a similar effect on hunger suppression. Or when it comes to the calorie restriction mimetics, yes, do those, but then also consider still incorporating like a daily 12 to 16 hour intermittent fast or a weekly 24-hour dinner to dinner fast. And then for the exercise mimetics, same thing. Use them as the icing on the cake, right? Go out and do your high intensity interval training, but do that and combine it with something like MOTS-c so you get even more mitochondrial proliferation. So, I'm a huge fan of getting the best of both worlds.
Yeah, me too. And I did your Boundless workouts for about 2 years straight, or on the Ladder app.
Yeah.
And I loved your mitochondrial workouts. By the way, if you guys are looking for a new exercise program, that one's phenomenal. I actually really enjoyed it. Because you put in mitochondrial training, then you had some breathing exercises and there's stretching. You did some of the Egoscue workouts, and then you had some high intensity days. I mean, I think it's really well done.
Yeah, I can walk you through the way I think about that if you want to. From from a fitness pathway, if you're stepping back, even if you don't have a personal trainer and you want to make sure that you're checking off all the boxes, so to speak, from every different physiological pathway that would be responsible for full body fitness. And that's my background. My master's degree is in exercise physiology and biomechanics. So just basically how we metabolize and use energy and how we target those physiological pathways, and then things like joint angles and how we move. Now, before I explain how I think about this, Ladder, we're defunct on Ladder now. You can't find the Boundless training on Ladder anymore. That's all moved kind of like in-house to Ben Greenfield Life now. And we changed the name to Team Triumph, but it's the same exercise programming, but you won't find my programs on Ladder anymore. Unfortunately, our contract kind of ended with them and we just decided to bring it all in-house. Sure. But anyway, so the way that you think about this is first pathway is strength. Okay. So strength is just basically your ability to be able to produce a certain amount of force. And even though there's a lot of different ways to train that, number one, top most efficient method in my book is super slow training. So at home, I'll use free weights, sometimes at the gym, use machines, but that's very, very slow. Often one single set to failure. So unlike a bodybuilding split where it might be chest and shoulders one day and biceps and triceps on another day and core and legs on another day, you're basically doing 2 to 3 full body workouts per week that are very, very slow, single set to failure. Extremely efficient way to train. There's an entire book written about this by Dr. Doug McGuff called Body by Science, and it gets into not only the cardiovascular effects, but the rapid strength gains that can occur with that type of 20 seconds up, 20 seconds down, very slow movement patterns. And the other thing I like about it is I train a lot of older executives, and if I have them out doing CrossFit or more intensive bodybuilding workouts, usually it's 4 to 6 weeks before some kind of tendonitis or injury or something pops up that then sets us back 1 to 2 weeks. With super slow training, it's really safe and you can get really strong really fast and maintain muscle really effectively. And it doesn't take a lot. So 2 to 3 times a week, if you're doing one single set to failure on your major movements, like chest press, shoulder press, pull down, row, squat, and deadlift. That would be an example of 6 exercises you could do. You're in and out within 25 to 30 minutes for your actual strength training. And again, that's 2 to 3 times a week. So that's the first box to check.
Yep.
The second box, you're not going to get some of the fast type 2A and type 2X fibers, which are very powerful fibers. If you look at muscle composition in long-lived mammalian models, it's actually the power, the ability to produce large amounts of force over a short period of time of a muscle, which is kind of like the quality of a muscle, versus just the strength and the mass of the muscle that's better correlated to longevity, probably because of the increase in overall function and athleticism with that type of approach. And obviously with super slow training, you're not getting a lot of the power, a lot of the quick explosive movements in. So what I then recommend people do is an additional 2 times a week or so. You'd even get away with once a week if you needed to, some type of more powerful explosive workout. This could be like calisthenics. It could be kettlebells. It could be something like, you could Google this, like the New York Times 7-minute workout, where like 30 seconds on, super hard, 15 seconds off, go through 15 different exercises. When we were in Utah, me and Jeff, one of our new friends there, we did the Spartacus workout in the gym, right? Like took us 25 minutes, but it was just like bam, 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 really quick, really powerful, really explosive. So understand that even if you're doing the super slow training, you should still do powerful, explosive training. But the difference between that and something like CrossFit, which has a greater degree of injury potential, is you're doing all of your powerful and explosive training under very low load, right? So we're not doing like heavy barbell snatches and cleans and, jump squats with a heavy barbell. This is instead things like just like super snappy push-ups or air squats or kettlebell swings with a reasonable load, right? So that's a couple of times a week. Then you move on to the cardiovascular components in addition to the strength and the power. And there's 3 things to think about with cardio. The first is your VO2 max. And if you look at longevity and fitness parameters associated with longevity, yes, how powerful a muscle is, like I already mentioned, is associated with that. But then in addition to that, grip strength, you're going to kind of check that box if you're doing the super slow training, especially if you're doing like a super slow 20-second up, 20-second down, pull up or pull down to failure. I mean, that's going to smoke your grip right there. And then if you're doing deadlifts in the same workout, similarly. Yeah. So we got grip strength, we got power, but then the other 2 that are really correlated with longevity are walking. And you can see I'm walking on a treadmill right now. I take a lot of steps each day, but it's not the total number of steps that seem to be as correlated to longevity as the actual speed, the walking speed. So even though when I'm on a podcast, I'm not walking super quickly because I'd be too out of breath. But if I'm just out on a normal walk outside, in the roads behind my house or whatever, my rule is walk just slightly faster than how fast your brain wants to go. Like you and me and Jeff did that waterfall hike in Utah, right? And we were walking slightly faster than we probably would have been if we were just like stopping and smelling the roses. But it's that speed of walking, it's more correlated with longevity than just how many steps you take per day. And then the last part is VO2 max. And that's kind of like the first box to check for cardio. Maximum oxygen utilization. How much oxygen can you take in? How well can you utilize it at the cellular level? And how much oxygen can you saturate in the muscle tissues? So to train VO2 max, surprisingly, it only takes once every 1 to 2 weeks doing a VO2 max training session. And if you look at all the literature on VO2 max, it typically comes back over and over again to going as hard as you can, maximum sustainable pace for around 4 minutes, and doing that 4 to 6 times with a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. So this would mean like every other Saturday, you're going to do a 4-minute warm up and then 4 minutes hard, 4 minutes easy, 4 minutes hard, 4 minutes easy. And you're going to do 4 to 6 rounds of that. And that's it. It's that simple. Like that's all you actually need to keep your VO2 max elevated. So that's the first component of cardio. The second component would be lactic acid tolerance. And I used to be super into this back when I raced Ironman triathlons, or like I would use a blood lactate monitor and set up all my heart rate zones based on my blood lactates. But the idea is you should be able to buffer lactic acid, which is basically what kind of causes your muscles to feel the burn during exercise, at a relatively efficient pace. And the way that you do that is you build up more lactic acid than you can technically get rid of. And then you do that over and over again. So your body builds up its lactate buffering enzymes. The best way to do that is the classic Tabata set. You ever done one of these, Reagan?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So
20 seconds on,
yeah.
10 seconds. Yep.
Exactly. 20 as hard as you can go. 20 seconds as hard as you can go. 10 seconds as easy as you can go. 8 times through. So it's about 4 minutes. The cool thing is you can simply say, okay, so for each of these days, I'm going to do super slow strength. I'm going to either warm up or cool down with a Tabata set. And if you do that, you got your lactic tolerance taken care of, and you can just kind of include it on those strength days. And then the third component of cardio is your mitochondrial density, right? How much mitochondria are you actually building? To build mitochondrial density, it's a little bit different than lactic acid training. To build that, what you do is you go very, very hard, but with a long, luxurious rest period.
Yeah.
Right. So when we talked about VO2 max, we talked about a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio, or like 4 minutes hard, 4 minutes easy. When we talk about lactic acid, we talked about a 2-to-1 work to rest ratio, or like 20 seconds hard, 10 seconds easy, 8 times through. When we talk about mitochondrial density, we're talking about more like a 1-to-4 work to rest ratio. So this would be, and you need to do this about once a week. This would be hop on a bike. And again, you could use this as a warm up for one of your other workouts or a finisher for one of your other workouts. You do 30 seconds as hard as you possibly can. And then if we're looking at something like a 1-to-4 work to rest ratio, you go 2 minutes, super easy, active recovery, and you do about 6 to 8 of those. So 6 to 8 30-second sprints once a week with really good, long, luxurious rest periods is what you need for mitochondria. So at this point, we've targeted strength, power, VO2 max, lactic acid tolerance, and mitochondrial density. And really, in my opinion, the only other 2 things that you have left to think about are your fat burning capacity. And this would be just like I'm doing right now. I'm walking while we're talking, engaging in low-level physical activity throughout the day, moving. I even like the idea of, like, on a weekend, going out, preferably in a fasted state, and doing like a long hike. Or my sons and I will go out and do 2 hours of frisbee golf, like hiking through the woods, playing a frisbee golf course. Basically something that forces your body to go for long periods of time at a low intensity, preferably without large amounts of fuel coming in. So you simultaneously increase your fat burning capacity. And this could literally just be like, for a lot of people, the weekends, you have more time. There's just something you do on a Saturday or Sunday that might be a bike ride to a coffee shop that's 20 miles away, or a long hike, or if you like to swim, maybe a longer swim session, or, if you like to golf, maybe going out and playing 18 holes with a little less beer, just something that kind of forces the body to burn fat and go at a long, low level pace. And then finally, the last piece is just mobility, right? Maintaining young muscle, working out fascial adhesions and crosslinks. So for me, what that looks like is when I get up in the morning, I allot myself 10 to 15 minutes to do foam rolling and stretching. So every week I'm getting like 90 minutes of foam rolling and stretching. I'll occasionally get a massage to kind of like have somebody work out even more adhesions. But even just that 10 to 15 minutes every morning is a game changer for mobility. And it just involves, I have a special room in my house. I call it my Zen Den. I got some foam rollers in there, some like vibrating balls, some elastic bands, some stretching materials. And I just go in there and take care of my body every morning. And I think that's the key to being able to take all the other things I was talking about and be able to do all this injury-free throughout the year. So coming full circle, you do strength 2 or 3 times a week with super slow strength. You do power or explosive training 1 or 2 times a week, preferably on a different day than your strength training. You do your VO2 max training once every 1 to 2 weeks. Your Tabata sets as like a warm up or a cool down for your strength training. Your mitochondrial training once per week. Mobility every day. Endurance on the weekends. And that's a pretty good program.
That's amazing. And then how often are you doing like Qigong or breathing exercises, Wim Hof breathing, things like that?
Yeah, great question. So if you look at, for me, that's Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, because I do some of my power and explosive training on those days, but that's only like 20, 25 minutes max. And a lot of times I've allotted myself sometimes up to a full hour to train. So I train with my 16-year-old sons a lot, and we'll go into the sauna on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. We'll do about 20 minutes of breath work in the sauna. Then we'll go into the cold pool for about 5 minutes, and then we'll move on to the kettlebell or the explosive training. So I've got it kind of baked in 3 times a week. And then Sundays are my rest day, my recovery day. But often that means I might be sitting in the sauna for an hour or doing a longer breathwork session or going back and forth from the hot tub to the cold pool or doing something that incorporates the heat, the cold, and the breathwork. So I do bake that stuff in.
Got it. Okay. And that it's interesting because what you've got, and I wish I would have had this conversation with you when I started the workouts, because you can see it in your training. You put the protocol in there, and I didn't realize it was that intentional. But I love it. And I think Body by Science, Doug McGuff, as probably the number one book I've recommended for my clients over the last 15 years or whenever he wrote the book. I mean, it's phenomenal, and it's an easy way, because we work with similar, people in their 50s, 60s, 70s. And the last thing you want is an injury, because that can sideline them for too long, and their whole metabolic system goes downhill. But the super slow is a way of building strength, and then you can start building the flexibility on top of that, and then the power can come in once we've got their joints healthy enough. And because I think power in the research, you may know this, but power in our muscles is what dwindles the fastest, like in a sarcopenic state. And the power is what can prevent the falls. You break the head of your femur and you're age 65, your all-cause mortality increases by 50%. So I think power is a real key.
Right, which is why, yoga and your Gwyneth Paltrow elastic band workout a lot of times doesn't cut it when it comes to staving off sarcopenia, especially in females who are sometimes intimidated by heavy weightlifting. The only females that get super bulky during weight training are either A, those who are on gear, or B, those who are eating at a pretty hefty caloric excess. But if you're paying attention to calories and getting adequate protein still and lifting heavy weights as a female, it's pretty difficult to excessively bulk. You got to be doing a lot of other things to get to that state. You also brought up a really good point when you were talking, Reagan, about how sometimes you'll start somebody off with super slow training, and then eventually they'll move into maybe some more powerful stuff, calisthenics, functional training, HIIT training, etc. What I just described to you would be like gold standard program to do for a year if your only goal were to stay fit, improve lifespan and health span, and you were already in a state where you could kind of like you can ride a bike hard, or you're able to deadlift the weight off the ground. And sometimes there is a little bit of training that needs to be done to get to that place. And that might be like you talked about, just doing something like the super slow training until you get to the point where you can do some of the more advanced stuff. But the other thing to think about is, I know many people who want to do a Spartan race or a triathlon, or they want to get a beach body, or they want to bulk. And this is where you bring in the concept of periodization, where rather than following exactly to the T what I just described, you've got phases during the year where you might be more focused on one of the specific parameters or a couple of the specific parameters I just talked about, right? Like if you decide you're going to sign up for a sprint triathlon this September, you might be skewing that program I just described a little bit more towards VO2 max, lactate tolerance, mitochondrial training, and endurance. If you decide, you want to bulk up for, summer season and do like spring training for bulk, you might be doing a lot more of the strength training. And rather than doing one single set to failure, you might be doing 3, but you're sacrificing some of the time you might spend on the lactic acid training or the endurance training. Or if you're just in like an intensive fat loss phase, right? You might be doing a lot of cold thermogenesis and fasted endurance training with a couple of strength training sessions each week, right? So it's going to vary considerably from person to person, depending on what your goals are. But ultimately, throughout each year, I think it is a good idea to have certain periods where you're focusing on strength, power, endurance, et cetera. And more importantly, you're hitting all of those different systems on a relatively frequent basis throughout the year. One of the things I've been doing with my own clients who I coach lately is programming in blocks, right? Like I'll program in like 4 weeks where we have a real focus on power and explosive training, or 4 weeks where we have a real focus on hormesis, cold, fasting, and mobility. And so even though you might not see everything that I just described in one of my clients on any given week, if you step back and look at a whole quarter of the year, like we're hitting all those parameters on a certain quarter. So obviously we can get more advanced and periodized with this stuff. Sometimes that takes working with an expert who's kind of like seeing the big picture and piecing it all together. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat.
Yeah. And VO2 max are there. That's my goal this year. Every birthday, I set new goals for my physical fitness, and or some habit that I want to see if it's important for me to bring into my future. Like I did ice baths every day for a year, about 8 years ago, and then I do 25 enjoyable miles. Last year, I had a goal to increase my vertical. And to the point where I could touch the rim again, and I'm not super tall, and so I did increase my vertical by 5 inches, and I can dunk the basketball. Ben, you'd be super.
The $1 million question is: did you get the overpriced heel elevated shoes from like the back of Men's Health magazine?
I did have those when I was a kid, but I didn't.
It actually worked.
Yeah. But yeah, I can dunk the basketball really well as long as you lower the rim to about 8 feet. Solid. But this year I'm working on VO2 max. Like that's my big goal. Anything you've seen that really can, I want to get to the elite level. Last time I checked, I'm at a 51. I'm good, but I want to.
Yeah. I think about 3 things. Maybe 4 actually. I'm going to say 4 things. First is very simple. What I already described, you should be doing that on a weekly basis if it's really, truly a big goal to increase VO2 max rather than once every 2 weeks. 4 to 6 rounds, 4 minutes, maximum sustainable pace. I like something like the Airdyne or the rower, something that uses both the arms and the legs. So that's one. And then the second would be what gets measured gets managed. There's some cool devices out there. One like the VO2 Master as a home measurement tool for VO2 max. There's another device called the PNOE, very similar tool. Or even though it's not going to measure VO2 max, it'll still measure peak flow, inspiratory and expiratory flow. There's a device called the AeroFit. And what I like about that is that it ties to an app that brings you through resisted breathwork sessions. So resisted breathwork, unlike hypoxic training, simply involves breathing in and out against resistance. So in my fanny pack, when I go on a walk, I have this little breathwork device called a relaxator, and it forces you to breathe in through your nose and then out through your mouth, but through resistance, right? It just looks like a tiny whistle. Another example would be like that AeroFit device that I just talked about. There's an MMA trainer named Boss Rutan. He has his Boss Rutan lung trainer, but any of these devices, they're like weight training for the inspiratory and expiratory muscles. And if we understand that VO2 max is a function of not only how well can you utilize the oxygen that you're breathing in, and that would be like your mitochondrial capacity, your vascularity, red blood cell function, iron, et cetera. It's also just how much air can you get in with each breath. So this idea of weight training for the inspiratory and expiratory muscles using a device like that is also a good idea. So we've got your weekly VO2 max sessions. Yep. We've got preferably measuring your results using something like a VO2 Master, a PNOE, or an AeroFit. We've got actually doing resistance training for the diaphragm and the inspiratory and expiratory muscles using, again, an AeroFit, a relaxator, one of those old school like elevation training masks, anything like that makes breathing harder. And then the last component would be some type of intermittent hypoxic training or exercise with oxygen training. This is more advanced, but there are tools like the LiveO2. That is a bag that fills with air that you can keep next to your bike or your treadmill. You put on a mask and you can go back and forth between hypoxia and hyperoxia. So you can simulate altitude training. I mean, I know you're in Utah, so you've got pretty good access to altitude training. What I like about it is that you can alternate back and forth from hypoxia to hyperoxia. So imagine like you were out on a run and you could within 2 seconds go from the top of a 13K mountain down to the valley. Well, that flushes your body over and over again with oxygen while still training you to tolerate low levels of oxygen. So that's called the Live O2. There's another one designed to do more in a sedentary position. I don't like it as much just because I like to stack what I'm doing. I'd rather get it done during an exercise session. So that one's called the Cell Gym, the one that you can do in a sedentary position. Now, you remember me talking about how you can train your mitochondria. Well, all I do is for my weekly mitochondrial training session, I actually use that Live O2 next to an exercise machine. So for each of my 8 30-second sprints, I breathe pure oxygen. And then for my recovery periods, I go hypoxic. So I'm training myself to recover at hypoxia and then flushing my body with massive amounts of oxygen for hyperoxia. And my VO2 max isn't huge. I mean, I'm at about 58 for VO2 max.
Nice.
You know, when I raced triathlon, I was in the mid 60s. I mean, if you're even above 30, that's pretty good. But I attribute a great deal of my current ability to maintain a high VO2 max to those weekly exercise with oxygen training sessions. So that's what I would do is the VO2 max training, measuring it, doing inspiratory, expiratory resistance muscle training. And then if you can afford it or you have access to one, the exercise with the oxygen training.
Love that. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Great insights there. So you got any big projects coming up, new books you're working on, or what's the future look like for Ben Greenfield?
Oh man, it always fluctuates. I just wake up in the morning and do the best job I can with whatever God's put on my plate for the day. But I did just put the finishing touches on Boundless 2.0, which is the complete rewrite and update of kind of like my Bible of biohacking. So that'll come out in January. Me and my business partner, Caleb Applegate, we have been working for the past year on a low-cost membership website that gives people access to like AMAs and Q&As with me, insider podcasts, debates, a little bit more edgy content, kind of a community. We're having all the new Team Triumph workouts in there, similar to the ladder workouts you did in Boundless. They're all now going to be on that platform. So we're launching that at about $15 a month in September. So I'll be launching this new kind of like membership-based platform for all sorts of cool stuff that's been vetted and curated by me. And besides that, man, I'm just trying to keep 2 16-year-old boys alive and foster their passage into the world as responsible young men.
Oh man. Well, they're doing big things. I mean, they've got their own podcast, books. I mean, pretty cool to see what you've done with your boys.
Yeah. And my team told me that I was supposed to say this, so I'll say it. We made a cold thermogenesis guide for your group, and you can get it at bengreenfieldlife.com/cold toolkit. And that's just got a bunch of the updated research I did for Boundless, but we just kind of like isolated the cold thermogenesis part. So bengreenfieldlife.com/cold toolkit. And now folks will be happy that I said what I was supposed to say.
Good. Ben knows how to follow orders.
I wake up in the morning and go where I'm told.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I have to be very tightly managed. Otherwise, I'm bound to just go do my own thing and forget. Well, this has been awesome, and I appreciate you taking the time, and really fun having you at the clinic. Ben came and we did a brain rejuvenation retreat together. Love to get another event going.
That was awesome. Yeah, dude, anytime. That'll be super fun to do another one. People loved it.
Yeah. It was
especially all your like insider peptide secrets and get a chance to try them out. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
The peptide parties always, that's the way to party. You just put a bunch of peptides in people, and I'm like, all right, look at how you feel right now. And then in about an hour, let me know how you feel. And it's an instant upgrade. I mean, people, they always leave the retreats happy. It's
kind of funny because if you come over to my house for a party, it's like we're in the sauna, we're jumping in the cold plunge, we're drinking ketones instead of cocktails and eating good food. Don't do a lot of peptides because those could turn into, spending monthly dinner parties, but the occasional event with you, I'm all in.
Yeah, we'll do it. Well, man, thanks so much. Thanks for all your work. You are the very first person that I ever heard a podcast through, just so you know. I don't know I mentioned that to you, but This was back in when did you start? Like 2013?
Oh, I started
2011?
podcasting just before my sons were born. So it's been 17 years. It was like, there was only like 6 health podcasts. Remember, Jillian Michaels had one, Rob Wolf. I think Dave Asprey had one. There was me and a couple of others. Like, I don't know if Joe Rogan had a podcast yet, but he was just getting started. And there was maybe like 50 podcasts total. And you had to like code your own RSS feed and submit it to Apple and wait 2 weeks and, jump through all these hoops. Now it's just kind of click it and publish. But yeah, 17 years, man.
Yeah. So I think that was about it. I was in New Orleans and someone told me about podcasts. I was out for a run and I'm like, let me find something on fitness. And then there's this dude, Ben Greenfield. I'm like, he sounds like he's from Idaho. And, I'm from Idaho too. So we both kind of have the little Idaho drawl.
Yep.
And so I was like, I love this guy. So thanks for all the inspiration over the last decade and a half plus. And keep up the great work. Any final words of wisdom you got to share, Ben?
Oh, man, I think probably, sometimes you hear a podcast like this and it's a lot of information and you walk away and it's like, well, what do I do? What's the next step? So here's the next step for you if you're listening in. Feed this through AI if you need to, or grab the transcript if you want the strength, the power, the lactic acid, the mitochondria all in front of you. Sit down, super simple, 8.5 by 11, map out your week, Sunday through Saturday, and then just write down which days you're going to do what. Okay, well, so Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, kind of like Ben, I'm doing heat, cold, breath work, and power. And Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm doing lactic acid and super slow strength. Saturday, I'm doing endurance. Every other Sunday, I'm doing VO2 max. And just sit down and map it out. And it's not that hard once you get it in front of you. So that's what I'd recommend to folks is with the information fresh in your mind, just write down a little plan for this week and go out and try it out. I guarantee you feel really good when you kind of like hit every parameter of your physiology in the way that I described.
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty amazing because my wife, she noticed a physical change in my body when I started training that way through your protocol a couple of years ago. She's like, you just look different. Like it's not like I put on a bunch of bulk. It wasn't my goal, but it changed my physiology. So it can do the same for you guys. And Ben gave you guys some really deep insights, things that I've never heard him talk about. So I really appreciate you going deep into your fitness strategy, Ben. Very helpful.
Cool, bro. Well, I'm honored you had me on. And hopefully we get a chance to hang out in person soon.
Totally. Yeah, anytime. And for those of you who love the show, make sure you share it with your friends, family, loved ones. Don't forget to go to bengreenfieldlife.com and we'll provide show links to the cold therapy toolkit. And we'll see you guys next time.